Hello and welcome to some faction difficulty ratings for Total War Warhammer 2 based on their Mortal Empires campaigns. I'm Dame Offensive. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing. Anyway, today we're going to start with the Huntsmarshal's expedition, led by Markus Wulfhart. He is part of the Empire, but he basically doesn't have any of those race effects because his campaign is so different. In terms of faction effects, he gets the Emperor's Mandate, which, when you advance campaign goals, grants better buildings and Imperial supplies, which are reinforcement shipments, which will come periodically, and when they're available, they're immediately recruitable. There's also the hostility mechanic, which reduces time to these supply shipments, but it reduces army effectiveness and increases enemy effectiveness. And when it hits maximum, it spawns an army for you to battle. Another faction effect is higher recruitment to Huntsman General Lords and lower relations with Lizardmen. Markus Wulfhart's legendary Lord bonuses are high ambush defense chance, high ambush success chance, reduced archer and huntsman upkeep, and the woodsman trait for his army. The rating system I use is fairly simple. 10 is ideal, 5 is pretty standard, and then 1 is bad. Theoretically, high numbers mean features that are good for beginner players, and low numbers are way more difficult and should maybe be tackled by more experienced players. First, we're going to rate Markus's campaign start. In terms of infrastructure available, I'm going to give him a 4. He does start with a minor settlement, which means no walls, which means it's less defensible, but it is a tier 2, and 1 slot is a port, so you get some money and growth, but maybe not the best. In terms of mobility in his start, he's gonna get a 1. There's jungle everywhere. It takes multiple turns to get between cities, and you don't have any movement bonuses. In terms of unique starting units, I'm gonna give him a 6. He gets war wagons, huntsmen, and archers. And people complain about the war wagons, but early game, because of their low unit count and their high health, they're pretty good at holding the line while the huntsmen and archers shoot down enemies. In my recent campaign, I kept them till about turn 10, and he's starting all with missile units, which are objectively the best units in the game. In terms of starting battle, I'm gonna give him a 1. At least on the higher difficulties, if you auto-resolve the battle, it's a Pyrrhic victory and you lose a unit. When I fought it manually, I got a close victory on very hard, and honestly, I thought it went pretty well. I don't know that I could have gotten a decisive victory. And then, on top of that, the army runs away and you can't finish it off. So that lord gets experience and then can just go home and recruit more. So really neither is a good choice. Personally, I opt for auto-resolve because melee units suck, but it eliminates the enemy army and then you can just recruit more missile units as you make your way to your next target. So the average of the Huntsmarshal's expedition start rating is a 3. It's a very tough start. Not that anyone's surprised, but with patience, it can be managed. Next is rating the timing of advancement. In terms of province completion, I'm gonna give him a 3. Basically, beelining both settlements still takes 10 turns, and that's assuming that you can win the battles there as soon as you get there, which can be a challenge. In terms of availability of a sack city, I'm gonna give him a 1. Everyone is going to hate you, so you kind of have to keep moving to eliminate them so that they don't destroy your settlements. Plus, with all the limited mobility, it's hard to find a sack city that's reasonably close to your land so that you can kind of retreat to replenish between attacks. In terms of timing of stack completion, I'm gonna give him an 8. He can recruit archers immediately, and they're really cheap to recruit, and they're very cheap upkeep with Markus. And then you can get your heroes fairly easily to hold the line. So you can get a full stack of missile units fairly quickly. And the crossbowmen aren't that far off either if you want to go for that, but they are a bit more expensive. In terms of power of stack completion, I'm going to give him a 5. If you go for an archer stack, that is fairly weak, but they can hold up if you are using your heroes effectively and planning your attacks properly and getting the right complementary Imperial supply shipments. So his average advancement rating is a 4.25. His advancement rate is somewhat standard despite his difficult start. Now we're going to rate his comfort zone. In terms of timing of enemy elimination, I'm going to give him a 5. The starting enemies are basically eliminated as fast as you can cover the province, which, as discussed before, is fairly slow, so that's kind of low. But you will gain more enemies as the turns go on, so you do have to move right on to the next enemy. In terms of timing of sustaining additional armies, I'm going to give him a 5. Marcus's province isn't very good at generating income, but Markus has such steep discounts on units that he kind of counteracts the lack of funds. In terms of the timing of getting a finisher stack, I'm going to give him a 10. You really want a ton of huntsmen in his army, and you can get that building at tier 3 right in your starting settlement, so it's pretty quick. And then you can just get artillery from the Imperial supply shipments. So he can get a very fast army that's fairly cheap for him. And he'll have a few heroes to round it out. In terms of timing of safety from neighbors, I'm going to give him a 1. He is surrounded by lizards who are going to hate him. And because of that, it'll take a long time to be comfortable enough to leave cities and trust that they'll be safe. So average out his comfort zone scores and he gets a 5.25. Overall, Marcus's difficulty rating averages out to a 4.2. Despite the very difficult start, the toughest parts of the campaign, I think, are in the first 20 turns. And then as long as you're managing your enemies quickly, it's just going to get simpler from there. Some additional thoughts on the Huntsmarshal expedition campaign in Mortal Empires. In terms of Confederation, the rest of the Empire is so far that it can be a real challenge. But the first hero I tend to get, Van Hal, I find to be weak in battle, and he's decent to keep on the campaign map, so he's somebody that you could pretty easily just send that way. In terms of rights and abilities, I find his heroes to be somewhat underwhelming, but they are very easy to recruit and they're immortal. So that really helps bring up his army when you have somewhat limited resources. In terms of special strategies, I was raising hostility wherever possible to get more shipments, plus it spawns a fight for more money and experience. My summary of the Huntsmarshal's expedition campaign difficulty on Mortal Empires. This is a paid DLC, Hunter and the Beast, so I would only buy that if you're more comfortable as a player. The start is very difficult battle-wise, but it is fairly straightforward if you like to just keep moving, since you will have a lot of enemies to go after one by one. So he's kind of a lower cheese campaign, if that's what you like. This faction might actually be a good entry point for historical Total War players who are new to Warhammer, because they'll understand the mechanics and be a bit more familiar with the unit types, and he's just generally less fantastical. But I definitely wouldn't recommend him to completely new players to Total War, because the challenge will probably make you rage quit. But that's going to be it for my difficulty rating of the Huntsmarshal's expedition, led by Markus Wulfhart. If you like this and you want to see more, or if you want to see the starting guides I'm doing, go ahead and subscribe. You know how YouTube works. Goodbye.